We urgently demand that the Prime Minister's office take direct control of evacuation efforts to ensure the safety and expedited return of Canadian citizens. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joly, holds an emergency meeting with family members in Canada and acknowledges the failure of Global Affairs Canada to provide transparent and equitable support to Canadians in Gaza. The Minister of International Development, Ahmed Hussein, coordinate with the United Nations to transport Canadians internally from the northern Gaza to the Rafah border, and the Minister of Immigration, Mark Miller, to provide expedited visa processing for family members of Canadians from Gaza, just like they did in Ukraine. We are aware that the Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister, Melanie Joly, has said that the first group of Canadians have left Gaza. Let me be very clear. We don't know the status of over 600 Canadians, permanent residents and family members in Gaza. And unfortunately, Minister Joly seems to think that crossing from the north of Gaza to the south of the border is as easy as getting on the QEW. It seems that her misinformation about the ease and safety to access the borders are far from reality. We have confirmation from family in the north that have clearly confirmed that Global Affairs Canada has abandoned their request for support to help reach to the Rafah border, as noted in the following email received by a family member in Canada. And I quote, "The situation in Rafah crossing remains fluid and unpredictable, and we encourage you to assess the risk as you and your family members decide whether to travel to the Rafah border crossing," unquote. This statement clearly expresses the lack of concern and the lack of urgency at the hands of the Canadian government to expedite the safety and the movement of over 600 Canadians, permanent residents, and their family members who are trapped and in danger in Gaza. What I will tell you right now from the families on the ground is they are seeing IDF on the ground and tanks on the road that are blocking people from movement. Imagine you are a mother carrying your child in your arms, trying to get you and your family to safety. Imagine you're trying to escape and you reach a military tank and a soldier with a weapon in his hand preventing you from crossing, knowing that we've already witnessed bodies scattered on the highway from being bombed to pieces attempting to escape. What would you do? How would you feel? What we're asking for is clear. And the evacuation of over 600 Canadian permanent residents and family members needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. We are calling and demanding that the Canadian government to walk the talk and act immediately. Time is of the essence. Enough is enough.
My name is Khalid Sabawi. When my family immigrated to Canada, we were stateless refugees from Gaza. My parents had been dispossessed from their land and livelihood by the state of Israel. I was 3 years old when we came to Canada, and like most immigrants, we came here because we believed in Canada, in the universal values that stand as a beacon of hope to the rest of the world. We were raised to embody Canadian values in our minds, hearts, and actions. We built businesses in Canada and also in the occupied Palestinian territories, so we may help Palestinians who have lived under brutal and violent Israeli oppression for 56 years, build hopes and dreams like those we were ever so fortunate to realize, thanks to Canada. We employ over 30 Palestinians in Gaza, a besieged, tiny strip of land home to 2.3 million human beings, half of whom are children, and is considered one of the most densely populated areas in the world. 70% of Palestinians in Gaza are refugees who were expelled by Israel, like my father, and have lived in refugee camps for 75 years. For the last 20 years, Israel has completely blockaded Gaza. No one can go in, no one can go out. Unemployment in Gaza is the highest in the world at 50%. It suffers from what UN experts call extreme food insecurity. Less than 4% of fresh water is drinkable. This is an Israeli-made disaster. And the late Israeli scholar Baruch Kimmerling called Gaza, and I quote, the largest concentration camp ever to exist. Our own Canadian scholar and Holocaust survivor, Gaber Mate, agrees. In the past month, as Israel mercilessly dropped the equivalent of a nuclear bomb on this Gaza concentration camp, my extended family, along with 1.2 million Palestinians, was forced to flee the north of Gaza, as they were instructed by Israel. Their individual homes had been damaged by Israeli airstrikes, and the horror of the screams around them caused them to flee and seek refuge in the east in my great-grandpa's house, where my mother was born. And as they huddled together, grandparents, parents, children, and grandchildren, Israel dropped a bomb on them. 46 members of my extended family were killed, murdered, exterminated in one instant by Israel. Our Prime Minister has repeatedly stated in a robotic fashion that Israel has the right to defend itself in accordance with international law. Yet the United Nations and human rights organizations across the world are screaming in the loudest voices that Israel is collectively punishing Palestinians in Gaza and its 1 million children, and that Israel has blatantly violated international law. Amnesty International has already documented what it calls, quote, damning evidence of war crimes as Israeli attacks wipe out entire families in Gaza. The UN Secretary General just yesterday stated that Gaza has become, quote, a graveyard for children. And yet, not one condemnation from Prime Minister Trudeau. On the contrary, a few days ago, he called the murderer of my family, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who was previously indicted for corruption, and reiterated that Israel has the right to defend itself. Canadians all over the country are asking themselves, is Trudeau aware that the current Israeli government is an extremist fascist regime that has publicly declared its intent to commit genocide against Palestinians? Netanyahu himself declared, and I quote, "We will turn Gaza into an island of ruins," and compared Palestinians to the biblical Amaleks who were wiped out. Israeli Knesset member and former public diplomacy minister said, quote, "Erase all of Gaza from the face of the earth." The Israeli army spokesperson stated, quote, "We are dropping hundreds of tons of bombs on Gaza. The focus is on destruction, not accuracy." And the Israeli defense minister confirmed that, quote, "There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel, everything is closed. We are fighting human animals." These are Prime Minister Trudeau's friends. As of today, Israel has killed 10,000 Palestinian civilians, of whom 4,000 are children, and injured 20,000 civilians. And it has yet to achieve any of its military objectives. Not only has our Prime Minister demonstrated a lack of humanity, he has demonstrated ignorance and a colossal lack of wisdom. Rather than take a Canadian position rooted in compassion, fairness, equality, and rule of law, he has desecrated the Canadian values we so cherish. Rather than condemn war crimes committed by all parties, he has sided with a racist and genocidal Israeli government. Rather than unite Canadians, he has divided them and stoked anti-Jewish, anti-Palestinian, and anti-Muslim sentiment throughout our beloved country. Prime Minister Trudeau, you are complicit in the murder of 50 members of my family. How can you ever talk about truth and reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples of Canada while you are complicit in the genocide of the Indigenous people of Palestine? There are 120 countries and 18 UN organizations calling for a ceasefire now, yet Canada turns a blind eye to the murder of 4,000 children and isolates itself by siding with Israel, the US, and war. When future generations look back at this period in history, Canada will be on the wrong side of history. In the aftermath of death, destruction, and war crimes, Canada will be condemned for its role in the axis of the complicit. Thank you.